The clock on the wall ticks with a cold, rhythmic precision that echoes through the vast, empty kitchen of this California suburb. It is a hollow sound, the kind that reminds you just how lonely a large house can be when the sun goes down. It is late, nearly midnight, and the house has finally fallen into a tense, artificial silence. My son-in-law, Jason, went upstairs an hour ago without a word, his footsteps heavy with the stress of a corporate world I will never understand. My daughter, Cindy, is still tucked away in her home office, the blue light of her laptop screen likely the only thing keeping her company in the dark. I am alone now, left with the remnants of their life. I move like a ghost, scrubbing the expensive marble countertops until they shine, and drying the delicate crystal glasses with a cloth so soft it feels like a mockery of my own rough, calloused hands. In this house, I am not a person with a history. I am a shadow. I am the invisible force that makes sure the coffee is hot in the morning and the pillows are fluffed at night. I am the silence that keeps their world running. Many people look at me and say, "Rose, you are so lucky. You have successful children, a beautiful home, and such a peaceful life here in America." They see the perfectly manicured lawn, the luxury cars sitting in the driveway like sleeping beasts, and the neighborhood where the police only come to check on alarm systems. They envy me. They see a woman who has made it, but they don't know. They don't see the scars of a lifetime of sacrifice hidden beneath the long sleeves of my sweaters. They don't know that behind this facade of peace, there are secrets, dark, heavy secrets that are slowly suffocating the life out of me. They don't know that my peace is a cage made of gold. My mind often wanders back to Vietnam, to a time when my name wasn't Rose. Back then, I was a teacher. I was respected. When I walked down the street, people would nod and say, "Jiao Go," greetings, teacher. I carried my head high, proud of the knowledge I shared with the next generation. My husband was a dashing pilot, a man who commanded the skies and wore his uniform with a pride that made my heart swell. We were the golden couple of our neighborhood. People looked at us and saw a future that was bright, stable, and filled with love. But his heart was as restless as the wind he flew in. He loved the horizon more than he loved the home we built together. One day, he flew away and simply never came back. He didn't say goodbye. He just traded our small family for a sky I couldn't reach, leaving me alone in a crumbling house with 3 young children, Nancy, Cindy, and Trung. The transformation was brutal. Overnight, the literature teacher who loved poetry had to become a warrior of the streets. I had to bury my pride in the same soil where I planted my dreams. I traded my books for crates of cigarettes, cheap household goods, and whatever else I could find to sell on the street corners. I remember the smell of the exhaust fumes, the heat of the sun on my neck, and the shame I felt when I saw my former students while I was haggling over pennies. But I did it. I did it to buy a handful of rice for my babies. I raised them on the scraps of my own dreams, teaching them to be strong, to be hungry, and never to settle for the poverty that was trying to swallow us whole. I taught them to survive, but I didn't realize I was also teaching them to be cold. As my daughters grew, I saw a fire in them that both terrified and impressed me. Nancy and Cindy realized early on that our homeland, as beautiful as it was, held no future for them. They watched me come home every night with swollen feet and a tired soul, and they swore they would never live like I did. They made a dangerous choice, the kind of choice only the desperate make. They decided to gamble their youth, their bodies, and their safety for a ticket to America. I remember the tears and the sheer terror of those years. Nancy was the first to go. She entered a fake marriage, a risky, shadowy arrangement with a stranger she had never met, just to get that green card. I remember the night she left. She didn't look back. She worked 16-hour days in dark back rooms, smelling of nail chemicals and desperation, sending every single cent home so Cindy could follow her. They did the back-breaking work that no one else wanted to do. They lived in cramped rooms, ate the cheapest food, and endured humiliation from people who treated them like they were invisible. They made it. They built a life. But the price of that dream was a piece of their heart that stayed cold forever. They learned that money was the only thing that could protect them, and in the process, they forgot how to be daughters. Years later, Cindy finally brought me here. She told me it was my turn to rest. She said, "Mom, come to America and let us take care of you. You've worked enough." I arrived at the airport with a heart full of hope, thinking I had finally found my harbor after a lifetime at sea. But the reality was a bitter pill to swallow. I didn't come here to be a mother. I came here to be an unpaid servant in my daughter's mansion. I am the one who wakes up at dawn, long before the sun touches the hills, to make sure the house is warm. I am the one who keeps the children quiet so Jason can sleep through his morning headache. Cindy has become a modern American woman, polished, professional, and incredibly distant. She prioritizes her husband's private space and their civilized Western routines over the ancient traditions of filial piety. To her, I am a convenience. I am the free childcare, the live-in maid, the cook who knows exactly how she likes her coffee. She doesn't see my exhaustion. She only sees the chores that aren't finished. The breaking point didn't come with a grand gesture. It came yesterday afternoon, over something so small it shouldn't have mattered. My granddaughter was playing in the living room and lost one of her expensive imported toys. It was a tiny thing, but the atmosphere in the house was already like a bowstring pulled too tight. When Cindy walked through the door, exhausted from a day of corporate battles, she saw the child crying and a few toys scattered on the rug. She didn't ask me how I was. She didn't notice the dinner I had spent 3 hours preparing to make sure it was exactly what she liked. Instead, she turned to me, her voice sharp and filled with a cruelty that left me breathless. She screamed, "You are so careless, Rose. If you can't help with the simplest things, at least don't ruin what we have. I didn't bring you here so I could have another thing to worry about. I brought you here to be useful." I stood there, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces, each one sharper than the last. I wanted to scream back. I wanted to remind her of the years I spent hungry so she could go to school. I wanted to remind her of the tattered clothes I wore so she could have a new dress. I wanted to pack my bags, walk out into the California sun, and never look back. I wanted to find a place where I was still a teacher, still a mother, still a human being. But I stayed. I bowed my head. I knelt on the floor and I picked up the pieces of the toy. I did it because I cannot leave. I am trapped by a secret that would destroy this entire fragile life they've built. I am carrying a $200,000 debt from back home, a debt I incurred to save my son Trung from the men who were going to kill him. I am a prisoner of my own love, and the American dream has become my silent, expensive cage. I am waiting for the bars to break, but I fear the day they finally do.
The nights in California are long, but they feel even longer when you are running from the truth. While Cindy and Jason are fast asleep in their master suite, I sit huddled in the dark corner of the living room. The silence of the house is heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant, lonely sound of a car passing on the street outside. The glowing screen of my phone is the only light in the room, reflecting off my glasses and making my eyes ache with a dull, throbbing pain that matches the rhythm of my heart. On the other end of the line, 10,000 miles away in the humid, suffocating heat of Vietnam, is Trung. His voice is raspy, broken. the sound of a man who has completely lost his way and is drowning in his own mistakes. "Mom, they are at the door again," he whispers, his voice trembling with a fear that chills me to the bone. "They said if the money isn't there by tomorrow, they will take the house. They said they would hurt the kids. Mom, please, I have no one else. You're the only one who can save us. If you don't help me, I'm a dead man." My heart skipped a beat, and a cold sweat breaks out on my forehead despite the central air conditioning. That money, the amount he is begging for now, is only a small fraction of the bottomless pit my son has been digging for years. Everyone looks at Trung's photos on social media, wearing designer clothes, sporting expensive watches, and posing in front of fancy cars with shoes sent by Nancy and Cindy, and they think he is a wealthy socialite. They think he is the king of the neighborhood, the successful brother of 2 American successes. But behind those flashy, filtered images are piles of discarded lottery tickets, overnight gambling sessions in dark, smoke-filled back rooms, and a mountain of mounting debts that could bury us all. I admit it now, in the oppressive silence of this American living room. The fault is mine. I am the one who built the pedestal he fell from. When Nancy and Cindy were struggling in America, working 16-hour shifts in nail salons, breathing in toxic chemicals, and coming home with backs that felt like they were breaking just to survive, they always wanted to protect their younger brother. They didn't want him to feel the sting of the poverty we had left behind. They wanted him to have the childhood they never had. Every month, crates full of expensive goods, electronics, and cash were sent home. Trung grew up overprotected, shielded from the harsh reality of hard work by the labor of his sisters. He never had to sweat for a single penny because he knew that if he just asked, if he just sounded a little bit desperate, his sisters would provide. He developed a taste for a life he couldn't afford on a teacher's pension. He spent his sister's American dream in the worst possible way, at the card tables, the cockfights, and the betting parlors. And I, fearing that my daughters would be heartbroken and that Trung would be physically harmed by the dangerous people he owed, chose to cover for him. I became his shield, and in doing so, I became his enabler. It was a cover-up that led me to the most desperate, sinful act of my life. Do you know the feeling of taking something that doesn't belong to you and pawning it? It is the feeling of being a thief in your own family, a traitor in your own home. Nancy worked herself to exhaustion for a decade to buy that house back in Vietnam. She saw it as her safety net, her one true achievement, the proof that all those years of humiliation in America were worth it. She trusted me to keep the title safe in my drawer, locked away like a sacred relic. But in a moment of absolute, panicked weakness, facing Trung's suicidal pleas and the threats of the men at his door, I did the unthinkable. I secretly took that document to a high-interest moneylender. $200,000, a staggering, impossible number that I can't even wrap my head around. I lied to myself that it was just a temporary loan. I told myself Trung would finally learn his lesson, turn his life around, and we would pay it back before the girls ever noticed. But the gambler's promise is written in sand. Before the old debt was even touched, a new one arrived, and the interest began to swallow the house whole, cent by cent, brick by brick. When I ran out of jewelry to sell and favors to ask, I did the impossible. I asked to borrow money from Cindy's mother-in-law. I knelt on her cold tile floor, a former teacher begging for mercy, and promised to pay it back from my meager pension. I thought I could keep the fire contained. I was wrong. The truth is like a wildfire in a dry forest. You cannot hide it with your bare hands. Cindy's mother-in-law, fearing for her own money and perhaps tired of my presence in her son's house, did not keep her promise. One evening, while I was setting the table for a dinner that no one would end up eating, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was too quiet, a heavy, suffocating silence. Cindy walked in, her face pale, her lips trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. She was holding a piece of paper that looked like a death warrant. It was a copy of my debt contract. The look in her eyes was no longer just the usual irritation or distant politeness. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. You took money from my mother-in-law to feed a gambling addict? You used Nancy's house as collateral? $200,000. Mom, where did it go? How could you betray us like this? How could you kill Nancy's dream for a brother who doesn't even care about us? I stood there frozen, the porcelain plate in my hand falling to the floor and shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces, just like the fragile, lie-filled life I had tried to build here. Nancy heard the noise and rushed over from the guest room, her face filled with confusion that quickly turned to horror as the words began to sink in. The biggest storm I had always feared, the one I had spent years trying to outrun, had finally arrived. The $200,000 secret was no longer a secret. It was an explosion, and we were all caught in the blast. The air in the living room felt like ice, even though the California sun was blazing outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a beautiful day for everyone else, but in this house, the world had stopped turning. On the polished mahogany table lay the debt contract, ironclad, undeniable proof of my betrayal. Nancy stood there, her face flushed with a rage I had never seen in all my years. She didn't cry, she didn't scream at first. Instead, she looked at me with eyes so cold they seemed to turn my blood to stone. "Do you have any idea how many drunks I had to serve?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling with a suppressed fury that shook her entire frame. "Do you have any idea how much humiliation I endured? How many years I worked until my hands bled just to buy that house in Vietnam? That was my retirement. That was my peace. And you took my sweat, my tears, and my future, and you poured $200,000 into a casino for him?" I could only collapse onto the floor, my legs giving out beneath me like paper. My trembling hands reached out, clutching at the hem of my daughter's expensive dress, but she pulled away as if my touch were poisonous. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell her about the midnight phone calls from Vietnam, the threats from men with cold voices, and the paralyzing terror I felt for my only son's life. I wanted to tell her that a mother's heart doesn't know how to say no when her child is in danger. But my throat was dry, and the words felt like ashes in my mouth. Cindy stood behind her sister, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are no longer our mother," she spoke, her voice flat and final. "A mother protects all her children. You are just an accomplice to a destroyer. You helped him kill this family, and you did it while smiling in our faces and eating our food." With a sudden, violent movement, Nancy grabbed her phone and dialed the international number. The video call connected, and Trung's face appeared on the screen, haggard, dazed, and pathetic. Nancy didn't give him a chance to speak. She shrieked at the screen, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You coward! You pathetic, selfish coward! You killed our mother today. Do you know that? Do you have any idea that she is living like a slave in this house just to pay for your $200,000 addiction?" Trung began to mutter meaningless apologies, his eyes darting around the room. But this time, the tears didn't work. Nancy's heart had turned to stone. "I am selling that house tomorrow. I am taking back what is mine. You and your wife and your children can live on the street for all I care.
I don't have a brother anymore. You are dead to me." The room fell into a horrifying silence as Trung, realizing his safety net had finally snapped, picked up a pair of hair clippers from the table behind him. Before our eyes, in a desperate, theatrical act of remorse, he began to shave off his hair. Coarse black patches fell to the floor as he wailed like a wounded animal into the camera. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm a failure. Please don't let them do this." I watched my son destroy his dignity on a tiny screen, and I felt my own heart being crushed into dust. I had tried to save him, but in doing so, I had only ensured his total destruction. After the storm passed, a terrifying, permanent silence settled over the house. Nancy and Cindy delivered their final verdict with the cold efficiency of judges. They would settle the $200,000 debt, drawing from their savings and taking out loans they would be paying off for a decade, solely to save the family's honor and prevent Cindy's mother-in-law from taking me to court. But the price of my salvation was my total loss of freedom. Cindy took control of my bank account, my meager pension, and my identification papers. "From now on," she told me, not looking me in the eye, "you hold not a single cent. You stay in this house, you cook, you clean, and you watch the children. You are here to serve. If I ever find out you have sent so much as $1 to Trung, I will put you on a plane and you will never see us again. You are a guest in this house, not a mother." I have become a prisoner in my own children's home. I walk through these beautiful, expensive rooms like a ghost, invisible until I am needed for a chore. Every night, my phone vibrates with desperate messages from Trung and his wife, stories of new debts, of hunger, of the children's school fees. But I can only remain silent. It's a painful, heavy silence that goes all the way to my bones. People still look at me at the grocery store and say, "Rose, you are so blessed to live here." I just nod and walk away. I look out the window at the white American snow, and I remember the teacher's Audi I used to wear so proudly. I remember the peaceful afternoons in my small garden in Vietnam before the debt grew like a cancer. I regret loving my son the wrong way. I thought I was a savior, but I was just an enabler, pushing him deeper into a pit of dependency. My American dream wasn't supposed to be about mansions or bank accounts. It was supposed to be about my children being together. But now they are strangers to one another, and they look at me as a shameful, expensive burden. Never use lies to cover up mistakes, no matter how much you fear the consequences. The truth has a way of coming into the light, and when it does, the fire it brings will burn twice as bright. Enabling a loved one's addiction is not an act of love, it is an act of destruction. Take care of your family, but take care of the truth first, because a house built on secrets, no matter how grand, will eventually crumble.